This is such a great passage to begin the new year with, particularly this new year. A new year with hope and anticipation after a year of despair and, well, a year that was dark and cloudy. Let's listen to how John starts us off again. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was fully God. The Word was with God in the beginning. In him was life, and the life was the light of mankind, and the light shines on in the darkness. Now, how many of us, at least when we were little, were afraid of the dark? You know, when my kids were little, my niece moved in with us for a couple of months, while my sister sort of worked to turn her life around, and she needed some space to do that. Sarah was about 5. I think it was about 5. We all knew her from family gatherings, and she just sort of moved in like part of the family. And suddenly, my 2 sons had a sister. My oldest son was happy to have a little sister to boss around, and my youngest son, he just sort of followed Sarah around. He was happy to have an older sister. Well, that first night, Kevin, my youngest son, came into the living room after we put the kids to sleep and said that Sarah was crying. Well, we didn't have a big house, so all the kids were sleeping in the same room. She missed her mom. So I turned on a light next to her bed, and I sat next to her and held her hand. And gradually, she fell asleep. Well, this became sort of a habit. But one night, after we all had gone to bed, the power went out. And of course, Sarah's light went out with it. And she woke up and got scared. So my wife brought her a flashlight. And from then on, she was afraid the power would go out. So she always had the flashlight in bed with her. So as she went to bed, she would switch on the flashlight and she would hold either my hand or my wife's hand as she drifted off to sleep. 2020 has seemed like a year of darkness. And of course, we can choose to think of this year, 2021, continuing the darkness. Or we can think of this year as one of light and hope. But that's a choice we have. Choosing how we think and how we feel. I was talking to someone this week about how we choose to look at the world. If we let the world take control of us, if we let others determine how we look at the world, if we let other people determine how we think and how we feel, we can be buffeted about. And we can end up seeing the world as dark and mean. But really, we do have a choice. We can be the victim of life, or we can choose how we see the world. We can look at the world ahead of us, this year ahead of us, as a glass half empty, a room dark and confusing. Or we can look at the world and the year ahead of us as a glass half full, a room lit up, bright sun beaming through the wide open windows. And I hope over the years, Sarah chose to see the world as a full of light rather than a scary darkness. She now has her own 2-year-old son, and sometimes she reaches out and holds his hand as he's falling asleep. The Apostle John here sees the world as coming out of darkness. And why? How do we know this? Jumping to the end of the passage, he tells us why. He says, he has seen the Word become flesh and make his dwelling among us, he says. That word is Jesus, of course. And then he says, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son. When John says, we have seen his glory, he doesn't mean some metaphorical we, or like you and me we. He means him we. He has seen the glory of the one and only Son. John has seen the light dwelling among the disciples. He has seen Jesus, was with Jesus. John saw the light. Now, we're not back 2,000 years ago. We aren't there when John baptized Jesus, when Jesus roamed the Galilean countryside preaching and healing. We're here in 2021. But we can reach out a hand to meet a hand that will guide us, like we gave Sarah. That may seem a bit hard these days because we can't physically hold hands because of the pandemic. But still, we know that there are hands around us we can hold and that will comfort us, that will guide us through the darkness that we have just been through into the light. And if we think about it, there is a link far back. The disciples not only saw the glory of the one and only Son, but they touched him. They held Jesus' hand as they prayed. We can imagine they held Jesus' hand when they were afraid on that boat on the stormy Sea of Galilee. And then they held the hands in prayer of those they met with in the early churches around Judea and Galilee. And they in turn held the hands in prayer of the missionaries like Paul as they were heading out to found churches throughout the world. As for us, I held my grandmother's hand when I prayed as a child, and she held her mother's hand when she prayed, and on, far back to our ancestor who was a Baptist minister hundreds of years ago, a chain of believers holding hands and praying. And we can imagine a chain leading to us when we hold the hands in prayer of those of us in this small church in San Francisco. We are linked back thousands of years, back to the disciples, back to Jesus. A long chain of Christians holding hands in prayer over the centuries. Hands that have guided us through the darkness that we have just walked through, and that will guide us into this new year of light, guiding us like so many before us. Today, right now, we can't physically hold each other's hands, but we can reach out and touch each other in many other ways as we walk into this year, as we walk into this year of light and hope. Just as in our minds we can hold the hands of our ancestors. For now, as we enter this bright new year, a new year of hope and expectation, let's guide each other. Let's bring light to each other. Amen.